Welcome to the Twist News. I'm Erika Grey. With the U.S. elections coming up, a topic of concern for U.S. citizens is the deficit. And today, I'm pleased to have on the show Ed Oswald, a former attorney advisor to the U.S. Treasury for tax legislation under the Clinton administration. And he is the author of the book From Ronald to Donald, How the Myth of Reagan Became the Cult of Trump. Welcome to the show, Ed.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, very honored. You've authored a book. You understand the whole taxation issue within the United States. And I'd like to just begin from the perspective of the deficit. Which president would be best for the deficit? Whose taxation policy do you feel stands out? So fire away.
Well, thank you. So I'll start maybe where it all began in terms of the national debt, which is now slightly more than $34 trillion. In many ways, up until say the end of World War II through 1980 or so, the US Treasury ran, a modest annual deficit. Not anything quite significant, but we were basically a creditor nation, not a debtor nation, if you will. All of that really changed with the election of Ronald Reagan in 1981 and his enactment of so-called supply-side economics. And the notion of supply-side economics is, and what Reagan implemented over his 8-year term, was significantly cutting federal tax rates. And when Reagan took office, the highest marginal tax rate was 70%. And when he left office in 1988, it was 28%. A dramatic, significant reduction in U.S. Highest marginal rates. And the deficit really exploded under Ronald Reagan. And that's really, Erika, where it all began.
And I know that for a fact, that what you're saying isn't just your opinion here, there was no deficit prior to Reagan taking office. Yeah,
I think that certainly Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, raised rates, I'll say, marginally. Certainly under Clinton, the budget looked a lot better prior to the election of George W. Bush. But again, just given the kind of dogmatic position of the GOP at the moment in terms of tax cuts, it's very hard for a Democrat to come in right now and raise taxes without being quite unpopular, where to some degree the deficit matters more to one party than the other, if you will.
But it also seems, in my observation, that both parties are guilty of spending, just in different areas. And didn't Reagan also, wasn't it his Star Wars program that really racked up, and the Republican wars? And it's almost, what's your opinion on that, of both sides racking up and neither of them conscious of the deficit?
Well, I would say this. To your point, certainly both sides are guilty of spending money. You want to make your constituents happy, and by giving your constituents things, they are happy, and you will likely be reelected. I would say that I'll maybe use Bill Clinton as the best example. He realized what the 8 years of Reagan and the 4 years of George Herbert Walker Bush were doing in terms of the complete reset of U.S. tax policy and the protracted view of the deficit. So, albeit unpopular, Clinton raised rates, and at least for a number of years under his administration, we did actually have a balanced budget. We weren't really paying off the national debt, but we did have a balanced budget. So I think that the Democratic Party is better at that arithmetic. Philosophically, albeit they like government programs and spending, they know that to put that on the credit card is going to hurt us in the long run. But I would say that the political positioning right now is difficult because if one party believes in math and the other party maybe not so much, because they'll say tax cuts pay for themselves, it's very hard with that on the playing field for one party to say we have to raise tax rates while the other party really plays Santa Claus. You're not going to win elections that way. And I do think, again, the Democratic Party knows the long-term consequences of the deficit, but are politically handicapped and really doing more to curb it, if you will.
How do you feel it should be curbed? What do you think is some good policy going forward for either party that takes office?
Yeah. So if you look at Biden's most recent budget, which came out roughly a month ago, and I think it's true. He talks about the wealthy paying their fair share, and his proposal is to have a 25% minimum tax on billionaires. And again, billionaires is loosely defined. We'll have to see what that really means, but it's certainly the most wealthy in the country. I think that's a step forward because I think the American people want everyone to pay their fair share. And we see both the wealth and income gap in this country, which is true. I think voters appreciate that. And I think that proposal would be popular. I would say too, and this is in the Biden proposal as well, is Trump's 2017 Tax Act cut corporate taxes significantly. Biden wants to raise corporate taxes. I also think that is a step forward. So, those are incremental proposals, but for the last 40 years, really, the American people have been conditioned to a really, frankly, a low income tax regime, and it's going to take some time and effort and some sobriety, frankly, for people to recognize that there's no such thing as a free lunch. We need to be mature about paying our bills, and if we really care about Medicare, Social Security, and the future of our children, we need to get off the credit card, if you will.
I exactly see what you're saying. And also, when you're talking about the disparity of the rich, just the bonuses that some of these CEOs are earning, meanwhile, the employees within these companies are earning meager, sometimes just enough to survive. Walmart is an example, but there's many of those different corporations. So I see exactly what you're saying. And I know you've worked on different policies. Was there a proposal to cap some of the bonuses? I know that the European companies don't have the types of bonuses that we have in the United States. Has that become an area of discussion?
Well, different proposals have been floated over the years, depending on which party controls the executive branch in both houses. That will really often dictate whether something can get enacted or not. So that is true, but the explosion of really CEO pay and again money going to the top really all came about in 81 and thereafter, with Reaganomics, with supply side tax cuts, and there have been, many studies to your point, more so as of late. London School of Economics, Thomas Piketty, the economist, talks about this in his book Capital in the 21st Century, that there's really a direct correlation between tax cuts for the wealthy and the national income going to the top brackets. And just to give you an example, during perhaps the golden age of the U.S. economy from 1932 to 1980, the top decile, that being the top 10%, they received about 30 or 32% of the national income. Right now, the top decile gets about 55% of the national income, and by 2030, it could be up to 60%. So this low tax regime kind of feeds upon itself year after year, where more and more national income goes to the top. And I think that perhaps a more holistic approach to, as you say, curtailing excess pay. And I'm a capitalist, but you need to have a sound democracy. You need to democratize the economy. There really needs to be a revisit of really what Reagan did in 1981 and thereafter. The notion of supply side tax cuts, which are kind of a folly, they don't pay for themselves, and really holistically looking at this to say, look, the rich paid their fair share for 50 years. That all changed in 1981. Look where we are. We need to really discuss this as adults.
I think that's one of the solutions. But the other flip side, where the Republicans make a lot of sense, is in the social programs and how much is doled out in those programs. For instance, with the immigrants coming in or refugees, we're one of the top destinations because we have so many giveaways. So what's your opinion on so many giveaways? And also I wanted to ask you about universal basic income, which is an idea that's being floated around, which basically just gives everybody an income no matter what. And where is that money going to come from?
A very good question for the time that we're in, 2024, partly through this century, and kind of where are we going as in many ways the world's sole superpower, albeit a debtor nation, if you will. I do think, and I don't have the right recipe, but I do think that the notion of Social Security and Medicare need to be looked at in some way. Right now, about 65% of the budget is, not subject to appropriation. It's just an automatic pilot. And that's a lot of the social spending, with the two giants there being Medicare, Social Security. I think there's just got to be some discussion there about, one, the wealthy paying more into the system, two, perhaps pushing out full retirement years to some degree, three, perhaps trimming the benefits for the super wealthy, which is not done currently. That's a large part of the federal budget, and we just need to look at that, albeit very politically unpopular. The rest of the budget is the 1/3, which is defense spending and foreign aid and so forth. But the big money is really on the entitlement side, although some people don't like to use that word. But I think, again, going back to whether it's raising tax rates, talking about the deficit, talking about entitlements, again, it goes back to the notion that there's no free lunch. And I think both parties need to come together on this. Although I'll say that even though, again, going back to historic Democratic programs and trimming them are tough, I think the Democrats do have that heart. I'm not sure about the Republican notion, the Republican side, in terms of their ability to, raise tax rates in any way. And in fact, the last Republican president to raise tax rates was George Herbert Walker Bush back in 1991, which, as you know, is now a long time ago.
Yes, the no new taxes, and then he raised taxes.
Yes.
Very famous for the no new taxes. I wanted to ask you another question. You mentioned about the defense spending and the aid that goes to other nations. And right now we're giving a tremendous amount of money to Ukraine. What impact is this aid spending or monies that goes to all different countries for all different reasons? What is that doing to the deficit? Yeah,
so let me just kind of give you an example there, and that's, again, a great question. So the U.S. defense budget, in round dollars, is roughly $870 billion, more or less. And the debt service on our national debt of $34 trillion, believe it or not, in 2024 will be about $870 billion. So the cost of carry on our in effect mortgaging in the future is now as large as the U.S. defense budget, which, if you think about that, is quite shocking in terms of our own national security and owing many in the world that type of interest on an annual basis. In terms of your question about, foreign aid, I might not be purely objective on this one, but I would say that, for example, in the area of Ukraine aid, I do view that as actually, if you will, smart money. And it's really a kind of a decimal place in terms of the deficit. And I just say that because having Ukrainians fight, if you will, almost as proxy war against Russia, we are really degrading the Russian military for probably 10 cents on the dollar. I view that as actually being a smart application of foreign aid, perhaps in contrast to others. But I would say in terms of, the dollar spend, in terms of a $6 trillion, annual fiscal budget, it really doesn't move the needle all that much.
That particular spending.
Yes.
What about U.S. Sanction policy? And now this is going into another area, and maybe it's not your area, but U.S. sanction policy and our weaponization of the dollar, causing nations to really move away from our dollar and take shots at it. Is that an area that you look at as well, sanction policy? Or not really, you stick with taxation?
Yeah, thank you. I'm really a tax policy person. We're obviously blessed with the US dollar more or less being, the world currency in many ways, the reserve currency. We're blessed to be able to print money the way that we are. But your note about sanctions and some propensity to move away from the US dollar is something we really need to pay attention to.
Yes, I think it's becoming another threat because enormous amount of sanctions that we issue, but now nations are retaliating. Even the European Union, about 3 years ago, was angry at a set of our sanctions against Iran that affected German companies. And so then what they decided to do was do all their energy transactions now in euros. And the member nations were to report each year. So you see all these steps being taken and us upsetting so many people that there's got to be another way to deal with nations than constantly weaponizing the dollar, which is making the nations now make it a mission to dethrone the dollar. And that's another question I'd like to ask you is, if that happens and the dollar ceases to be the world's reserve, what do you potentially see happening in the United States financially, tax-wise?
My mind is not able to get around that question, frankly. Obviously, the last century was the American century, and we hope that this upcoming century will be too. But to your point, we have now the common currency in Europe, the euro, and then we have really the rise of China. It remains to be seen really where China goes, I think, a bit in this century, just given their political system and other things that, other perhaps internal restraints that we don't have. But I think if we moved away from the dollar being the world reserve, the currency, I think it would be, the word cataclysmic comes to mind, which is perhaps why I can't really articulate the outcome there, but I would say it'd be something we want to do at all costs to avoid. And that's why I think it's so important to have our own fiscal house in order, to be more aware of the sanctions policies that you highlighted, and to really be more conscious of how lucky we are to have the dollar in the current position that it is.
Oh, absolutely. And it's allowed many Americans to live a lifestyle that other nations don't have. So the final question is, whose tax policy are you rooting for? Democrats, Republicans? Is there a piece of the Republicans you like, the Democrats, both? And what do you feel is the most important issue that should be addressed first by any president that takes power?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. The tax policy in 2025 is going to be on the front burner for a number of reasons. One, the election, and then two, Trump's 2017 Tax Act, the TCJA, is expiring at the end of 2025. So not only will you have a change in the executive branch, perhaps, but you'll also have this 2017 Tax Act expiring. So it's going to be front and center. Some of the outcome will be dictated by which party controls the House and Senate, obviously. But let me paint out two scenarios. So let's just say that Biden is reelected and he controls the House and Senate. The Democrats take both chambers. I think you're going to see a lot of what he proposed in his current budget enacted. That being corporate tax rates will go up, taxes on the wealthy will go up, perhaps the estate tax will be looked at. But I think, and people have oversold this a little bit, but if Joe Biden gets reelected together with the House and Senate go his way, you could have a real revisiting of Reaganomics. In other words, a real turning back the tide of the tax policy from the early 80s to get us back to.
How much do you foresee that would bring into the U.S. budget?
It's a tricky question because what Biden has said is that he's not going to raise the taxes on anyone making less than $400,000 a year, which excludes, believe it or not, 98% of the households in the United States. So his proposed tax cuts are certainly more than symbolic. I think his tax cuts his tax increases could bring in between $3 and $5 trillion, both if they all get enacted. But I do think that type of tax increase could help us with both the wealth gap and the income gap in this country, which you noted earlier. So it could be a turning of the tide. It'll take a lot of political skill and, again, kind of a home run in terms of both houses. But that's the way I see it moving, somewhat of a pushback on Reaganomics, and you've seen that in part of the legislation he enacted in his first 2 years.
So, Ed, you've actually given us a really good piece of information, which is that just those two changes would bring in a significant amount. That's good. That's really good information for people to know.
Yeah, it's again not going to balance the budget. There's real money there, and that could help in a number of respects, but it can certainly help adjust the trajectory of spending that we're on. And again, it's not a silver bullet, but it's part of the perhaps puzzle piece to help put this puzzle together.
Right, because there's a lot of issues, as we talked about. We talked about all of the entitlements, and there's a lot of things that can be picked away at. But you brought out a really, really good point of how much. I had no idea that many dollars could be brought into the U.S. budget just by those two changes. That's significant.
It is. It's real money. And if I have a minute just to go to the other side of it, I think if Trump gets elected, and again, assuming he has the House and Senate as well, because that's what it'll take. I think they will look to extend his 2017 tax cuts. I don't see really any tax increases that Trump would introduce that it goes against, GOP orthodoxy. I think that will, cost between $3 to $4 trillion to extend those tax cuts. As opposed to the myth that tax cuts pay for themselves, they don't. So we'll have $3 or $4 trillion in additional spending or money added to the deficit. And I think that's just the way that will go. Again, it'll take kind of a home run by Trump to win both houses, but you couldn't have a more different juxtaposition here in terms of which way the needle goes. If Biden gets reelected, he has the House and Senate, taxes go up. Trump wins the tax and Senate, taxes go down. And then if either one wins the executive branch, but has again a divided government, if you will, they don't have a clean sweep, then we're a little bit in checkmate. We're in negotiation land, perhaps half a loaf. There'll be a lot of compromises. It's tricky to know the outcome there, other than again looming in the background or a lot of tax cuts expiring from 2017, which are going to make people really focus on this in 2025.
Well, I'd like to make a final comment and have you comment on it. The problem is, while that sounds wonderful, I'm noticing in the whole landscape, there seems to be more confidence in Trump, in part because of Biden's age and his brain freezes. There just doesn't seem to be the confidence in him continuing the leadership at his age. What's your thought on that?
Well, again, I'll give you my personal view. This is obviously separate and apart from tax policy, but in my view, just one person's view, despite, I'll say, frailties of both men, I would go with Joe Biden in terms of at least the leader of the free world, as opposed to, I'll say, Trump, maybe some comments he's made about NATO, his comments he's made just about regimes he might like in Eastern Europe. Despite taxes, democracy and the ability to vote, etc., is really the most important thing, at least to me personally, tax policy aside.
Well, we talk about a lot of those issues on this show. We talk about U.S. foreign policy. And anyway, you've been a wealth of information. This was great. And would love to have you back again. But I want to thank you for coming on today.
Erika, I've really enjoyed our time together. It's been a pleasure to speak with you this afternoon.
And we'll look forward to having you back.
Thank you very much.
Well, that was informative. Be sure to get Ed Oswald's book, From Ronald to Donald. And if you don't subscribe to The Twist, hit that button and stay tuned for more.
Get down.